And here we are once again, everyone. It is the spoiler room. We're dancing the Konga line one more time. We've been looking at King Kong films all month. Hope you've been enjoying the discussion. It's been an interesting journey to say the least, but we're not done yet. Yes, folks, as you say, tonight the crew and I are climbing into the ring, and it's a three-way match between the spoiler room crew. King Kong versus Godzilla 1962 versus King Kong Godzilla 1963 versus the spoiler room crew. Yes, that's right. It's a three-way match. How we're going to end up at the end of this, I have no clue, but I have a wonderful crew member with me tonight to talk about both versions of this interesting film. It is none other than the man who keeps coming back for more. It is Mr. Ian Simmons. Hello, Ian. How are you?
Great. We're going to talk about a movie that I loved so much I watched it twice.
don't come on now. It's I find it fascinating, the differences, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about
The
it this
differences are
evening.
all in like the first 20 minutes of the movie, and then it's like interstitials. I feel like I did something to you, Mark. I hurt you in some way. You're like, here, I need you to spend 3 hours of your life comparing and contrasting the same movie.
You could have just said no, and then it would have just been me babbling up here for
No,
40
not gonna
minutes.
leave you hanging.
So, I mean, you survived King Kong Lives, so I mean, after
King Kong Liz was so much better than both versions of this.
woo, there's some bold statements. That's what I wanted to hear. So thank you everyone for joining us, venturing down the stairs, pulling up a chair and popping your favorite drink as we talk some movie spoilers. And yes, we're diving into King Kong versus Godzilla. King Kong versus Godzilla. Uh, did you want to give the synopsis, or I can give the synopsis this evening if you'd like, Ian?
I'll give it. King Kong fights Godzilla, and there's a lot of Japanese people running around. There's something that I never thought I'd see, which was Japanese blackface. Help me out with this, Mark.
Yes.
What was going on that island?
Well, never mind the island. The assistant to our two TV crew people, their assistant alone was the worst case of it.
Yeah.
Out of yeah, it. Whew, howdy.
The only thing I can say is like maybe they thought, hey, we can copy the Americans in absolutely everything. But it's like, wow.
I didn't get a chance to look up how Toho or what made Toho want to get licensing for King Kong. To be able to get King Kong, RKO maybe needed the money. That could be it. But yeah, you're like watching this going, okay, there's two different stories depending on way you watch this. Again, as we compare, if you go by the Japanese version, we have a pharmaceutical company who also has ads and they sponsor a TV show and they're on the ropes. So they need a gimmick of some sort. So they run across a scientist who has these wonderful medicinal berries. So they decide to go out there because there's also supposedly a demon creature out there on the island.
A demon god.
A demon god. So they send the PR guys with a TV camera and such out to record this. They run across not the natives from King Kong Skull Island, but they're supposed to be similar. But they look, and I'm describing this because this is how they look, and I apologize anyone, but it looks like a bunch of extras from Japan just crawled through the dirt to make themselves look darker. Some of them weren't. And so I was like, and you look at it, go, they could have easily just had the folks on the island be, a Polynesian or some kind of, they didn't have to try to make them of a darker skin color because it just does not look right at all at any decade, whether it is 2024 or 1960 3. This, I don't know who thought this looked right. But anyway, so the ad company goes out there and they go and they get Godzilla and they decide to capture him and bring him back. Completely different a bit than from the American version, which we don't get any of the subplot with the ad company being, well, we get a little bit of it, just
Yeah,
not as
that's in
much. We
there.
don't get introduced, we don't get the subplot with the triangle between the brother, the sister, and the fiance. That's pretty much cut out to a very thin couple scenes where there's a lot more time spent with that relationship and that group of individuals. Instead, the US version substitutes a really bad narration guy in a really makeshift set.
Yeah, it's like Edward R. Murrow meets Entertainment Tonight or something, and they're like beaming satellite feeds from Japan to talk about like these weather events and these animals waking up in the sea. I mean, we actually get shots of the satellite. It's so I know I wasn't around in 1962, but for me, I'm like, okay, so yeah, satellite is beaming the signal from one country to another. I don't need to actually go out into space and like see the satellite and then like see the relays and stuff. I'm like, just
Well, and
come on, chop chop.
I think that satellite shot's actually from a completely different movie, if I remember correctly. I think it's from Mysterians. I'm not 100% on that, but um I do know they use a different shot in Mysterians in the American version and near the end of the film, which we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, they took out basically in the Japanese version, you at least have a little bit more human element in this relationship between these three who end up getting caught up in the thing with King Kong versus Godzilla. King Kong makes it to the mainland. He breaks out of these his binds or whatever. He runs across the woman who we're introduced to in here from a train and
Fumiko, yeah,
huh?
Fumiko, I think.
Fumiko. And so you get a little bit more of a human element in the Japanese version, whereas the American version is a little bit colder of a straight sci-fi, like here's the monsters, here's the action, here's more monsters.
And I watched. Well, yeah, for the my show, we talked about Godzilla 54 versus the Americanized version in
Right.
56, and it's kind of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of King Kong versus Godzilla, I was so happy that I took out all the human like love triangle relationship stuff because it was so boring. And I was reminded of the difference between Peter Jackson's King Kong and the original 33 King Kong.
Right.
Like we talked about how Ann Darrow, when we first meet her in 33, she's stealing the apple from the street stand.
Right.
Whereas in Peter Jackson's version, it takes like 45 minutes of her backstory as a struggling vaudeville actress and all this stuff to find out how she got to that fucking apple in the first place. It's the same thing here. I watched the Japanese version of this movie, King Kong versus Godzilla, first.
Right.
I did the reverse of how I watched the Godzilla film.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, just falling asleep. It's just so tired, and they're trying to be comedic, and it's the fiance and the brother, and they're like, working in this TV studio, and it's so funny and witty and charming, but it's not. It all falls flat. I watched the American version. I'm like, oh wait, we cut out all of that. This is amazing. But even though there's a 7-minute difference in the runtime, the American version still, maybe it's because I watched it second, and there's not that much difference between the movies. Like ultimately, aside from some narration devices, it felt like it was 6 hours long because I'm watching the same stuff. And I'm like, no, I saw them battle. It was great 2 hours ago, and it's still there now. I hate to admit it, Mark, I was scrolling Twitter during the last like 45 minutes of this movie while it was on.
I can see that. I mean, this isn't higher up on many people's lists as far as either King Kong or Godzilla films go. It really resting on the collision of these two classic characters. It feels like they had that, but then we've got to come up with a story around. It's like, oh, we've got it now. Now, what do we do with it? And yeah, it's a mixed bag because when you get to the fights, you're like, oh, we're at the Godzilla Kong fight scene, and then it gets done, and then you're like, okay, and then we get either news footage with the American version or the Japanese version. We get people stuff, but it's like, yeah, okay, and then you get back to the fight. You're like, oh, okay, here we are with the fight. I did like the angle that they set up because it is the same argument with your Batman v Superman is how does Kong fight a fire breathing dragon just like how does Batman fight a alien from another planet who's got all this super everything. So they do add an interesting element that I've only ever seen in the King Kong versus Godzilla film, in that King Kong now can channel electricity. He can store it in his body because the Godzilla's on land and Kong comes up and they're like, oh, they're just going to fight naturally. That's okay. Let them fight type of deal, where we'll just let them battle it out. That's okay. But then everybody, the minute they get together, people are like, wait a minute, how's Kong going to beat Godzilla? Because Godzilla's like, he can just set him on fire and walk on his way, which he almost does. But they're like, okay, well, we've got a plan. We can nuke him, but that'll be our last resort. First, we're going to try to bury Godzilla, and then we're going to try to electrocute him with the 1 million volts plan. And so the Godzilla, they make this huge, that's one thing I love is that by now in the monster films, because now you're talking 10 years of monster mayhem for Japan in the movie universe, they've got some very fast engineers. It is amazing how quickly they dig this huge hole for Godzilla and lay out mats and basically put grass over it so that they could lead Godzilla with a river of fire so he could fall in a hole and they could bury him. But that didn't work, did it, Ian?
It didn't. And I have a note here. The one note that I took was in the American version.
Yeah.
The newscaster guy says the world, this is the emergence of Godzilla. I think it's just after he'd been broken out of the ice. He said, the world is stunned to learn that prehistoric creatures exist. And then immediately says, Godzilla is making his way to Japan or whatever. I'm like, okay, so we just found out these creatures exist, but you've already named him.
Well, what's also hilarious is the UN guys, because they send the submarine out to look at this glowing iceberg. And I don't know where they found these American actors. It's like they grabbed some guys off the street and said, hey, you want $50? Here, you get to play a submarine captain. And the guy was like, okay, I will play a submarine captain. And so we have water now in the, the guy was awful. But so they send this submarine to go check out this glowing iceberg, which is where Godzilla was, which again is given a nod to in the Godzilla X Kong film. That's where that came from as far as the glowing iceberg goes. There's actually a number of nods in that film to this movie. But so you get that, but you're right, because the UN guys, one of them says, oh, it's Godzilla, because the submarine crashes into the iceberg. Godzilla breaks through. The radiation is jumped, and then you hear the growl and fire inside the submarine, and you do hear one of the UN guys go, Godzilla, and like you said, but then we get this like infomercial break with the guy who's giving a report, and some other guy whips out the old children's dinosaur book and talks about, oh, we believe he's evolved from this prehistoric animal. And I'm just like, you already named, like you said, everybody knows who Godzilla is. Why are you acting like this is a new thing?
I mean, I'm not up on my Godzilla lore. I mean, I watched the first movie for the first time like last month, for crying out loud.
Sure.
But when we first encounter Godzilla and he's in that iceberg, I almost got the feeling like maybe this is a sequel to that first movie or something else. Like I feel like he was
Um,
trapped there after a battle or something, and then he broke out. And because I feel like people should know who he is, certainly at this point.
you would think so, and I mean, the Japanese definitely know who he is. So how does the rest of the world not know?
I don't know because that would have been an international incident. And
Sorry.
honestly, it's funny. Bless you. That's another. I mean, that is something I did like about the American version as well. In getting, kind of getting to the chase,
Mhm.
where we have in the Japanese version, there's a lot more scenes involving that submarine crew and the terrible actor who played the captain was like he was like great value Sterling Hayden from Doctor Strangelove. And he even kind of looked like him, but they kept like cutting that chunk of scenes up and dispersing it throughout the first part of the Japanese version. In the American version, they just condense it into one pretty long scene, and it's very effective.
Mhm.
Like they encounter this thing, they get stuck in the iceberg, they try and like I don't know if they try and torpedo whatever, but they awaken Godzilla, and then he breathes his fire of fury down, and then the ship it kind of blows up. I guess we don't get to see it, but you hear
Mhm.
the screams and everything. Very effective. And I think if the rest of the movie had been that tense and not as silly, it really could have been something. Because that was a scene where I'm like, oh, I'd like to watch this in one of the new like legendary Godzilla movies. Like if they recreated this scene today, I'd be like much more interested.
Well, this is the third Godzilla film, so this is after Raids Again. So,
So is it in continuity though, or is it
well,
just the third Godzilla
kind
film?
of, because at the end of Raids Again, I believe they kill Godzilla by burying him in a volcano, by an avalanche. They completely bury him, but not in an iceberg, but they do bury him. So I
Hmm.
think that's kind of implied that this Godzilla that they free, you know, they buried him. What is it? Let me pull it up here. Yeah, they trigger an avalanche by blasting mountaintops. Godzilla tries to exhale one atomic breath before being completely buried by the last avalanche of mountaintops. So they bury Godzilla. So that is true. He is buried. But in this one, he's buried in an iceberg and he awakens. Which you're like, did this lose track? But then again, continuity among the Godzilla films is very loosey goosey. It always
Sure.
has been.
But I mean, it's a cool visual of seeing like what's going on because we're like kind of underneath the iceberg when we see the sub kind of lodged in there, and then it starts glowing, kind of pulsating, and then we see it from the air with that helicopter, and then it breaks open. You see, it's almost like the giant like iceberg egg. You see Godzilla kind of like thrashing around in there. I was waiting for them to get a little too close and him to like irradiate the copter or something, but no, it's a cool way to start off your movie. It's just that unfortunately, then very quickly we go back to our advertising guys and the island. And I think that might be part of it. This Conga Line month has been great, Mark, but I've seen the origin of Godzilla like a billion times this month. Like, hey, look, there's a mysterious island and
Oh,
there's a
you mean
bunch of
King Kong?
natives and
You mean
King Kong, yeah, sorry. And
mhm.
then there's a giant wall that's supposed to keep out King Kong and he's going to smash through the wall and he's going to be strapped to a boat and go back to the mainland.
You would think they would have came up with something maybe a little bit more original as you go along.
Especially because I mean, even in 1962, these movies had been around for, you know, 30 years and 20 years respectively. People know these characters by now. I mean, it literally is just mashing up like the first Godzilla movie and the first King Kong movie, and then they kind of fight. And I don't even understand the end battle. Mark, did Godzilla drown?
Well, it depends on which version you ask. Now, this comes to where for a number of years I had always heard before I actually watched both versions because I had only ever seen the American version. And
Okay,
so people had said for the longest time, well, in the American version, King Kong won, and then in the Japanese version, Godzilla won. And that's what I heard for a number of years till I actually got to see finally both versions. The only difference between the endings is one, the US version, it is implied that Godzilla most likely is dead, supposedly, because Kong is the only one that emerges from the ocean. And you even get Mr. Narrator going, maybe he is dead. Godzilla is finally, dead, and we'll let Kong go back to his island and live in peace. And we're like, yeah, that's a bunch of bull. No one would let Kong, once they found out about him, live in peace. But that's a whole nother story. But at the
Also, how does Kong know which way to go?
instinct, and he's a
Oh,
smart,
right,
he's a
instinct.
smart ape. He uses the stars to guide his way. I don't know.
He's an ape astrologist.
He's an ape astrologist. There you go. Ape astrologist. Copyright Spoiler Room 2024. I don't. He's just instinct. He knows how to get back home, kind of like a pigeon. I don't know. Maybe but in the Japanese version, when Kong is swimming away, and they say, well, Kong's going to go back to his island and live there peacefully, according to the translation, the subs, and then you get Godzilla roar and then King Kong roar, which is implying that Godzilla isn't actually dead, but we never see him. But that's the only indication, the difference between the two at the ending, to where there's an indication Godzilla may still be around or not. US version, no roar of Godzilla. Japanese version, there's a roar of both Godzilla and Kong before the credits.
Why couldn't I get one shot of them wrestling under the water?
Because they didn't have that yet. I don't know. Well, they had underwater shots in the original Godzilla, so I don't know why they didn't have money, budget. I mean, literally at
toppled into the sea, and then it's like, okay, now Kong like rises up and swims away. Like that's the most anticlimactic battle ever.
Well, no, they start the volcano, and that's the thing too. At the end of the Japanese version, there's not volcano, but earthquake. At the end of the Japanese version, there's a rumble, a bit of an earthquake with them fighting underground. Kind of like when Popeye and Bluto were fighting underground. There was a little bit, but there was just a little shaking rocks in the Japanese version. In the American version, they felt that was too little. So in the American version, they added the tsunami wave that was flooding, that came over the hills, and that at the end, this huge wave and huge rumble and everything. That's shots from the Mysterians, actually. That's where one of the shots from the Mysterians that they borrowed came from, because they felt they needed to make the disruption bigger with the fight between Godzilla and Kong for the US version. So that's why you get a few extra shots of destruction when they go fighting underwater.
I must have been refreshing Twitter. I missed that.
That's there is the difference between those two. Yes. See, now you have to go back and watch it again.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
But you don't want to miss that extra bit. Yeah, when I watched these and did these for the Godzilla month, I watched both of these, and I didn't look back at my review of how I felt about them, but just watching them this time, I do like the Japanese version a bit better than the US version, just because the US version, the breaks, which again, that's how they handled some of these versions between the US and Japanese versions, is they would interject these things that were shot in one room. They literally have a curtain in the background to cover up the rest of the stage that they're on. They tried to make it international, but they're all shooting these scenes from the same room, just from a different angle, pretty much. They found the most American looking guy in all of America to be the narrator for this film. I mean, he even had Peter Graves going, damn. Excuse me. So, it's just interesting to see their approach, but you can tell that the American one, even with some of the explanation, kind of like they did with the original Godzilla film. In the original, you had the scientific explanation, but it was handled more like from an American report, whereas with this one, you get the same thing, to where you got the scientific explanation for some of Godzilla and that from actual characters within the film. We break away to one of the UN representatives who gives the scientific explanation to the dumb, US folks, dumbs it down for them a bit so you understand it on a more simpler term.
Yeah. I don't know. The
Well,
differences in the movies are not like significant. Like when you watch the Japanese Godzilla versus the American Godzilla, you can tell, oh man, they left a whole bunch of stuff out. The movies mean completely different things. When I'm watching this, I'm like, yeah, they kind of gave it the Godzilla treatment in terms of like cutting stuff up
mhm.
and adding this new narrative device, but it's just kind of the same movie. There's nothing under the surface. It's not a serious film. It's like Martin and Lewis meet Godzilla versus Kong with a weird like Japanese
Well,
executive who thinks he's Groucho Marx and possibly Adolf Hitler. Like when he was wearing that tan suit and the red
he had the
armband, I'm
tan
like,
suit.
what are we doing here?
He had the tan suit, and I'm watching. I'm like, wait, is he wearing a red armband? I'm like, what?
And he had the stash. I'm like,
His stash was a little bit bigger than, but yeah, it was close enough to where you're like, wait, but going back to the Kong stuff, he fights an octopus, a real octopus. It was actually interesting. They have this real octopus that they shot footage of. They didn't do stop motion for the most part with it. You do get a little stop motion with the octopus, but otherwise they just like took a miniature set and dumped a real octopus on it.
and that was really effective because you watch octopuses move and they're just like so alien. Like, ugh.
Well, and then you get the sound design in there too, the little squishy noises again. That part, I enjoyed that part. There's actually a little bit of a tension moment with that where you get this story where if you watch the American version, the one of the PR guys, his corns are hurting him. That's why he's upset. In the Japanese version, he's scared to death of Kong, and so he hurt himself running away. But in the American version, it's his corns on his feet that are hurting. Either case, they send one of the young native boys to go get the red juice, that the scientist discovered to help with the pain because he needs to sleep. Well, while the kid sneaks into this storage area where the red juice is, an octopus comes. And the mom goes searching for little boy, and she finds little boy, and then they both get trapped in the hut with the octopus. And then everybody's like, "Oh shit, an octopus!" And everybody tries to go fight the octopus. And then they don't realize, oh wait, we had all these red barrels out for Kong. Kong shows up. He's like, "Oh shit, an octopus!" And he rips through the gate. And he's like, "Hold up, I'll take care of this." But that whole sequence, at least the sequence with her trapped in there, I thought there was at least a little bit of tension with that, with the octopus over the hut and the mom and the kid. The way they directed it, I thought there was actually a little bit of tension in there. Like, wait, are they going to kill the two? Because they are just side characters. I mean,
Yeah, but I mean, like, I don't know. If this were the original, in the original tone of Godzilla or King Kong, I would have been afraid for those characters. But this is a goofier movie.
mhm.
They try and have some moments of like weight, but ultimately, I'm like, nah, they're gonna be fine. I think that's one of my problems with this film is that if it had been in black and white, I think I would have appreciated it more
Mhm.
because unlike the movie we talked about last week, which was, in the 1980s, where the effects have become more sophisticated, kind of dodgy, sure, but more sophisticated. This is 1962. It's in color, and goddamn, everything looked like it was just men in suits stomping around on toys. And I understand that's like the whole charm and gimmick of it, but I couldn't take any of it seriously because I'm like, this is nowhere near as good as either of the movies that inspired this matchup. Like it's not convincing at all. Whereas the other ones, we talked about this. I was like convinced that I was watching, King Kong smashing things up and Godzilla smashing things up.
Yeah. Um, I'm not sure if they were just trying to change the direction of it. I know Godzilla Raids Again wasn't the second Godzilla film wasn't exactly received well either. after the first one came out. A lot of people don't care for that one. It's not great. There are 2 versions of that one as well, by the way. I
$1 million.
believe.
You pay me $1 million, and I'll think about watching them.
If I had $1 million, if I had $1 million, if I had $1 million.
They're playing Brookfield Zoo this summer.
Oh, are they really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you going? No, just kidding.
I thought about it, but
Mhm.
no.
No. But if I had $1 million, maybe I'd go back and reshoot this. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, this is the 3rd film for. Would it be for? No, it'd be the 2nd Kong film, I think, and it's the 3rd Godzilla film. It might be the 3rd Kong film as well. I forgot if they did one in between this one. Let me look that up quick. Sorry, folks, I should have had that up earlier. Because I'm not too versed on how many they had, but looking at it, hey, they gave me oh yeah, there was Son of Kong. So this is number 3 for both monsters. Son of Kong came out like literally months after King Kong. So I'm not sure on that one. I don't think I've ever seen Son of Kong, but I should. But yeah, King Kong versus Godzilla is basically the 3rd one then for both these monsters to come out.
And it's kind of the curse of the 3rd movie too, for both of them.
Almost the curse of the 3rd movie. Well, then Toho had the rights for a next movie after this, which I actually have on this DVD set, which is King Kong Escapes, where King Kong takes on a Mecha Kong. In that one,
I didn't know there was a Mecha Kong. I knew about Mecha Godzilla, but wow,
there's a Mecha Kong right there.
Is that
There he
another
is.
case where the humans built this thing to stop King Kong, or is it like an alien or something?
No. I think they built him to ward off King Kong, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I watched it. But it is interesting that you don't get another Kong movie after King Kong Escapes till 76. So you have almost what is that, a 9-year, almost 10-year span between the two. Just like you had a 30 years or 29 years span though between the last time you see Kong before Toho picks it up.
You mean Godzilla?
No, Kong. Son of Kong was 1933. This
I
is the
see,
next
yeah.
time you see him. Kong, Godzilla had only been around 10 years. So, Kong is the veteran, so to speak, the older guy, which is probably why he got his ass kicked more by Godzilla. I don't know. But he does do a mean suplex. So on Godzilla. So there is a wonderful suplex with Godzilla.
Well, when Kong jumps on top of Godzilla and starts pummeling him, I immediately thought of Ralphie beating up Scott Farkas in A Christmas Story.
Yeah, let's talk about our creatures themselves. Godzilla didn't look too bad. His suit, it looked okay. Compared to Kong, it looked all right. Kong was looking a little janky in this one.
A little mangy, yeah. I don't know. With Godzilla, there was something about just his arms were too flappy. Like he was doing a lot of this. And I'm like, it looked like it was a guy in a suit, but his arms were not in the armholes.
Well, he had long claws on this, and he had a thing to where he clanged his claws together when he was excited. So it was like, it really felt like this was made a little bit more for the younger audience.
No.
In a way, you know what I mean? I think it was intended to be lighter fare, which is probably why it's so jarring, considering the first films that these two behemoths are out of the gate. They have such serious films. To see them go here so quickly with the 3rd film, I think is also part of the jarring, the kind of off-putting with it. You're just like, wait, now, Godzilla's posing, he's clapping, you know. I mean, Kong pretty much does everything but the Bruce Lee come at me finger wave at one point, you know. And yeah, it is a goofier film than its previous ones, and makes me wonder how the audience may have felt back in 63. I mean, could you imagine, especially old grandpa who had saw, King Kong on the big screen in 33, and then, his son saw Godzilla in 54, and so they both decided to go out together to see, hey, let's check this out, because we both, have grown up, had these characters, and then they see this and they're like, oh, okay.
Well, it's a great question, but I mean, we're looking at it from 2024,
True.
where we've had
Yep.
lots of like incredible CGI spectacles and things like that in this, even in this universe, or these combined universes. I can imagine seeing something like going from Kong 33 to seeing King Kong versus Godzilla like in color. I mean, because for the time, yeah, maybe it wasn't as jarring. The model work was nice, even though it's still very clearly model work. Plus, they weren't watching it in high definition necessarily. It was like in a big,
Yeah.
on a big screen. I don't know. It's a good question. I could see people being either upset or being like, "Wow, this is really fucking cool," even if it's silly.
Well, I just pulled up the page real quick because, I did not prepare as much info as I thought I needed for this. I apologize, folks. But originally, it was going to be King Kong versus Frankenstein from the original animator in San Francisco, King Kong versus Frankenstein. And then they changed it to King Kong versus Prometheus. And then, but it was going to be stop motion animation, but the cost was too high for most studios. They're like, yeah, no, that's going to be a little too expensive. And I guess Toho really wanted to do a King Kong film for quite some time. So, so he went over to Toho. And and apparently the frustration caused the death of someone. And it's just interesting history. But yeah, apparently it went King Kong versus Godzilla because they couldn't get King Kong versus Frankenstein off the ground as a stop motion film. So they went to Toho with guys in suits.
How would King Kong versus Frankenstein even work unless there's some alien space ray, maybe coming from our satellite that we keep seeing, blasting something down to blow Frankenstein up real big, or King Kong to get real small? Because that just sounds really dumb.
I think they would have probably had Frankenstein get really big.
It's making me just that information makes me love this movie a lot more. So I think it saved. I dodged a bullet there.
We may have dodged a bullet there. Absolutely.
I will say there is something. Yeah, I'm not crazy about the idea of Kong can just absorb electricity and like use it to his advantage, but there was a neat visual in the climax when he'd been kind of laid out and he's laying there and all people think he's down for the count, but then a storm comes in and lightning hits him and he gets that blue face. It reminded me of the resurrection scene from Jason Lives.
Yeah.
Where in the beginning of the graveyard, he's got the lightning, the rod sticking out of him, gets hit by lightning, and it kind of makes, I think it made his hockey mask kind of blue too with the electricity. Yeah. That was nice. Apropos of nothing, because they didn't have a time machine to go forward and see, oh, what if we pay this homage to a character who won't exist for 3 decades? But it was, it was a nice touch.
It was a nice touch, and it was a way for them to at least to give Kong a somewhat feasible idea of at least being able to go toe to toe against Godzilla, because he didn't get electrocharged the first time when he gets his ass kicked the first time by Godzilla, first time they meet. And then the storm comes, and it kind of plays into it what they set up earlier, because on the island there was a storm and then Godzilla showed up. as well. So, you know, the storm theme with with King Kong, I mean, at least I like that they brought something at least a little bit different to him. And so that made him, because as he's hitting Godzilla, they actually do this really cool animation. As he's hitting Godzilla, they got these little electrical lightning bolts coming from his fingers as he's hitting Godzilla. You know, and Kong does use a little more strategy when he meets Godzilla for that second round of fight. So you know, I liked some of the characteristics they gave Kong, even if he didn't look that great. At least they gave him a little bit of like he wasn't just the big dumb gorilla just constantly charging him. He used a little bit of strategy, not a lot, but a little.
And they, I know this is in the American version, but I don't remember it being in the Japanese version. But they had one of our talking head scientists talking to the news reporter, and they brought out models of their brains. They're like, yeah, Godzilla's brain is this big, and Kong, they brought out like an actual ape skull and said Kong's brain is this big. I get that it's because he says, Godzilla is pure instinct and violence, whereas Kong is more, he's capable of like higher level
Thought,
thinking
yeah.
and strategy, right? But I'm still thinking, I don't think that quite works because if you think about a skull, it's meant to house a brain. To that
Well,
analogy, like ours would literally be a pea brain encased in like 6 feet of cement in here. Like it wasn't because those monsters they're huge in this movie. That is the one thing I really did appreciate is these monsters were giant, and I think they pretty much stayed to scale, which
yeah,
is something we haven't been able to say about some of the other movies we watched.
yeah, they were actually to scale. I mean, these were both behemoth creatures. You didn't get any real buildings that were taller than them. There was the one, I guess, famous building in Japan that got King Kong when he finds the girl, and they kind of do the Beauty and the Beast type of angle with her, and he's on top of the building, but there's aren't really any really tall structures for him. So yeah, they always seem like they're very big creatures, and I like that too. You know, you're right. Their scale stayed consistent, which we couldn't say about King Kong Lives, which you know is really weird to say about a film that would have came out 20 years later, but they had a harder time with that than they did with that scale than they did with here in King Kong versus Godzilla. So I mean, there is props there. They were actually big creatures, and they don't have the brain discussion in the Japanese version,
Yeah.
which I thought it was weird that they put it in the American version because Godzilla never has been just an instinct. I mean, he has his fault of instincts, like you had in Godzilla '85, where he followed the bird song. But at the same time, Godzilla was more than just instinct. He's always been a little bit more, I think, than just raw violence and instinct.
Right, because I haven't seen a lot of Godzilla movies, obviously, but he's kind of been a protector in some cases. I know that's kind of carried over to some of the legendary stuff, right?
It varies. It always depended on which way the wind blowed. Sometimes Godzilla is protecting the people from the aliens or whatnot, but he's not so much protecting the people on purpose. Well, okay, some of the later Godzilla films. And the only reason I know this is because I did that month where I watched all of them. So I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I have seen at least once all the Godzilla films. And for some of the ones where they really leaned into when you get the Godzuki and the really the kid orientated goofy Godzilla films, yeah, he was a hero of the people and people were looking forward to Godzilla showing up, you know. But it always was more of Godzilla was protecting his territory more so than doing it for the good of the people. It was like, no, this is my area and you big monster are in my land, get the fuck out kind of thing. Not so much, oh, don't worry, people, like Gamera. Gamera's like, I'm going to protect the little kid who calls my name out every 5 seconds. Okay, that's just what Gamera does. Whereas Godzilla's like, no, I own these bitches. You don't get to have them. I'm going to take you out. because these are my people to destroy, not yours, motherfucker. That's what he says when he goes. That's what he's saying. So just to let you know,
Nice.
I
Thanks.
translate Godzilla. So
The subtitles just were not working, I guess, because I didn't catch any of that from the roar.
well, they had. Yeah, I mean, we're talking. They had to clean them up for audiences. They didn't want the actual translation of what Godzilla was saying because then they would never get airtime. But no, that's what he was out there. He was like, "Motherfucker, these are my bitches." That's what Godzilla was saying a lot of times. Now I want Godzilla to say that. No, but I mean, it swayed in the breeze whether or not Godzilla was a good guy to the humans or a bad guy. And that was always the kind of the weird thing is when you went into a film, you weren't always quite sure which it is. You knew he was going to fight a big monster, but you didn't know if he was going to be there. Hey, I'm destroying this town. You just interrupted my destruction day. So I'm going to come kick your ass versus, oh, I got to protect the people. I'm going to come kick your ass. And then there's Destroy All Monsters, which is a wonderful film. I love that film. With aliens controlling the monsters. Because after a while, you got to get aliens in there. Because why not? Of course. But as far as this film goes, it's an interesting thing that it's the third time out by these folks, by these creatures. They are done better later on. It is interesting how many more Godzilla films you've gotten versus Kong films. And maybe one of the things is what we have seen doing the Konga Line this month is that people seem to be a bit of a loss of what to do with this monster versus Godzilla. Whereas I'm not saying all the movies, and trust me, not all the movies have done Godzilla proper. Many of them have done Godzilla dirty, where you're just like, wait, what did they do to my big guy? Why is he jumping up and down and posing on an alien? Why is he's like, yay, whoo, posing, whoo. Okay, why is he doing? So I'm not saying that perfect, but it's just wild on how after this film, King Kong Escapes, you don't get another Kong film for so many, like at least 10 years, and you got other Godzilla films in between. It's wild. And then even after that came out, the 76 one, you didn't get another one until King Kong lives.
I think these movies never should have been franchises. I think what they should have done, because they're aside from the original versions of both, they aren't movies that you go to for the story. You go to see the giant monster fight.
Right.
But as you keep pumping these things out, and I'll use the legendary movies as an example. I haven't seen all of them, although I don't need to see all of them because I've kind of seen all of them, even though I've only seen like 3. I think what you do is you place a moratorium on sequels and just say, okay, every 15, maybe 20 years, we're going to make a new Godzilla movie to keep pace with the technology. It's going to look more realistic. It's going to be more gritty and violent or whatever. You do the same thing with King Kong. There doesn't need to be, multiples of these damn movies. Treat it like they did with Rocky, or the Rambo franchise. It was like, oh my god, they made Rambo 6, but it was like better than anything that had come out since the first one. And the same thing with Rocky or whatever. I might be getting those wrong, but yeah.
Oh god, the Rambo films. Ugh.
Well, no, I mean, like, because it was not the last one they did, but it was the one they did in like 2006.
The second last Rambo film was fun. Was a good one. Yes.
Right, but then they made the mistake of, oh my god, this made so much money. Let's make another one. Like, no, stop.
And then they made that other one,
Rambo versus the cartels in Mexico. I'm like, no,
that one made no sense. One thing I guess you could say is Toho kind of did that. While they gave it over to Legendary to, make your Godzilla films, Toho proper their last live action one was Shin Godzilla. And they hadn't made one for 12 years between Godzilla Final Wars and Shin Godzilla. That was a 12-year span. And Shin Godzilla was completely different. And I like Shin Godzilla. There's people that don't exactly. I really like Shin Godzilla. It was different. It was darker. It cut away a bit again from what you were talking about, kind of the goofiness of Godzilla, where people are there to see the monster fights. It really brought Shin Godzilla really brought a edge of horror back to Godzilla because he was scary as fuck, which he was. He was creepy out, especially the different forms. I don't know if you've seen Shin Godzilla,
No.
but you watch him go through some of these evolutionary changes. We don't first get to see him, and a couple of these forms that he is before he's in the main form, which is scary enough, but the other forms are really freaking creepy, and there's political commentary back in there like they had way back in 53 and that. So yeah, in 2016, Shin Godzilla kind of was that, to where they took a 12-year break. And then from Shin Godzilla, they did the animated films. But as far as live action goes, from 2016, they didn't do another one until Godzilla -1 for live action. So, that is kind of the strategy where they broke away from where it was a monster of the week type of story, to where they kind of brought it back a little bit more to its horror and darker roots with Shin Godzilla and Godzilla -1.
Right, and I think, yeah, I'm happy to amend my statement to say, if put something out when you've got new technology to show off, but
Yeah.
also if you've got a new story to tell or a new
Mhm.
take on the genre or a return to form for the genre. But I mean, like, I would have taken, if you had just taken any of the legendary Godzilla or King Kong movies and just picked one and put that out, and then not done another Warner Brothers legendary movie for 12 years, I think that would have been fine.
Oh, yeah.
That
No, yeah.
I don't think Godzilla 2013 or whenever the hell it was good, because you saw the monster for like approximately 15 minutes of that 17-hour runtime or however the hell long it was. It felt like forever. Uh, and then the other movies, I don't think I like them because they all just kind of feel very similar, very
Mhm.
samey.
Mhm.
But I think if you just had one of those, like, oh my God, these creatures look amazing and the destruction is awesome, then it would have been something special instead of like, here's another Godzilla movie. Great.
It would have been interesting if they would have left it at Godzilla King of the Monsters as far as the legendary goes. It's like, okay, you got Godzilla, people complain, well, we didn't see enough Godzilla and this and that. Okay, here's Godzilla King of the Monsters. Plays to all the Godzilla nostalgia. We got all these creatures back. We're using the technology to its fullest. You got big creatures beating the crap out of each other. Shameless plug, I got to interview one of the heads of Ghidorah. Check it out on the Spoiler Room Production and Special Mark Productions website. It was really cool talking to him about some of the stuff they were involved in and what went into the production. And yeah, and then the legendary could have came out with Godzilla King of the Monsters and just left it, and then wait even 5 years, and suddenly you come out not with a Kong film, Godzilla versus Kong. You like don't even do the Kong film. Just suddenly come out with, oh yeah, we've got Kong, and here's Godzilla. And do that, and at least give it that time to breathe more, like you said. But that's not the era we live in now. It goes for the same reason what we were discussing in the pre-show with like the Marvel and Disney and all of these things that feel the need to crank out IP content constantly, good or bad. They want it out there because, oh, the iron is hot. Well, this was big, so let's just keep milking this cow until it's completely dry. And it was even funnier though when Godzilla -1 came out, and then you had Godzilla X Kong, and so many people were like, "This isn't a sequel to Godzilla -1," and you're just like, "Yeah, no shit, Sherlock." It's like, did you not pay attention? So now you're confusing people because. Don't get me wrong. I love that we have both in the universe. I love it. I love it. I love it as a monster I'm like, I got my goofy and I've got my serious. This is awesome. But for your folks who may be just be coming into the monster franchise, they'll be going at this going, these movies don't match up. Because they just see the name associated with them, you know.
I understand. I don't believe those people are real.
Mm.
They might post online, but I don't know how you can be that stupid to watch even just the trailers and
Yeah.
think that they're at all connected and not understand that, you know, different companies can make different. My head hurts, Mark.
Hey, we're getting two different Russell Crowe priest exorcism movies that aren't even related to each other. So we had the priest's exorcist, and now we have the exorcism. And if you look at the posters, you're like, oh, it's the sequel. And you're like, no, he's a completely different priest in a different exorcism. And you're like, wait, what? Oh.
Well, because he did the Pope's Exorcist, and there's this other one coming out, but he played a priest in another movie like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for there to be the Russell Crowe papal cinematic universe where we find out they are all connected somehow. They're triplets. They were separated
They're
birth
triplets.
and called by the Lord.
They're all brothers who have taken the cloth in different aspects, and they all involve exorcism or something. I don't know.
They're all brothers and fathers. There you go.
Brother fathers. There we go.
Ugh.
Father brothers. There we go.
That sounds like a Mr. Bean character. Oh, this is Father Brothers.
So yeah, Godzilla, King Kong versus Godzilla. Not a great entry into the history of films. I mean, they're not all going to be great. It was an interesting try. I think they fumble the ball with this one. I enjoy the Japanese version more than the US one. Mainly because of flow. And I think I did say this in my reviews when I did my Godzilla month, is the tough part with the American versions of the Japanese Godzilla films is you watch the Japanese versions, and even if they're slow, at least the narrative or the flow of it moves a little bit more congruently versus the US ones, where you basically have, you know, I'm going to explain things to you now type of break, to where we're going to pause the movie, you know, like a teacher. Okay, kids, we're going to pause it here, and I'm going to explain to you what's happening. You know, which kind of breaks up some of the flow while watching it, whether or not that's a slow flow or a fast flow, you know, that's your choice. But I'll take the Japanese version over the US version of this, if nothing else, for watching it without the info breaks.
I like the American version more,
Mhm.
just because I think the first like 15, 20 minutes are a lot stronger in terms of that flow. Like I mentioned, they cut out the relationship stuff.
Yeah.
They condensed the whole submarine storyline into
Mhm.
one scene. But then after that, I think both versions are just kind of like, okay, fighting each other, and there's the rematch, and then look, I got to see Godzilla munch through a power line again. Hey, look, I get to see King Kong stepping on a streetcar with people screaming inside again. Like it's
Hey,
it's
now
the same shit.
Godzilla touched the lines this time, and unlike his predecessor, he didn't walk through the electric lines. So their their million volt plan worked because he walked the lines. It was Godzilla who chewed through the electric lines, and that's how he absorbed all of the electricity power.
Kong, yeah.
Kong was able to fight Godzilla. So Godzilla this time around did not push his way through the power lines like last time.
You're right. It was a completely different monster that pushed his way through the power lines.
That's
Totally
right.
different
Yeah.
experience. You're right, Mark. Yeah.
See, and it's Kong who screwed up their million volt plan. Their million volt plan would have actually worked and kept Godzilla out of town, but then Kong came up and screwed everything up. You know,
That's just bananas.
that's I'm
Sorry.
not going to ape that joke, okay? Instead, we're going to close up shop for the night and stop dancing the conga line. Next month, I was going to call it one thing, but I've changed my mind because it's my show, damn it. So next month is just, it's a ritzy month. So we're ritzy. We're getting ritzy. We're putting on our top hats. We're straightening up our white ties, and we're brushing up our tails as we look at films, or however the lyrics go. I don't know. I fucked it up. It's I don't know. I'm still getting over a cold. Leave me alone. But in any case, next month we're looking at films that involve putting on the Ritz in various different ways. How, you may ask? Well, our first movie, which we're covering next week, may tip you off. We're looking at Young Frankenstein. How is that related to putting on the Ritz from 1930? Well, you're just going to have to tune in and find out as we do Ritzy month of May here in the spoiler room. So,
I hate to correct you, Mark. It's Frankenstein.
it's Frankenstein. Sorry. Yeah. Don't start with me. Oh, you must be Igor, my uncle's assistant. No, I'm Igor. My grandfather worked for your grandfather. Anyway, yeah, we're going to be in for a lovely discussion. A lot of crew members signed up for that one. Go figure. As we look at Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein, 1974. So yeah, should be a fun time. And tune in for that. And now this is where I give my crew members always the license to shill. So Ian, thank you so much for pushing through King Kong versus Godzilla twice. And you still want to come back for more. I appreciate it. The floor is yours. Shill away, sir.
Yeah, pushing through. That's great because it did feel like I gave mental birth without an epidural. But yeah, I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com and also on YouTube. If you look up Kicking the Seat, you'll find me there. I do movie reviews and interviews and roundtables and all that kind of fun stuff. So yeah, packed week this week and beyond, as you might recall from the pre-show if you are a subscriber to Mark's Patreon, and shame on you if you're not. But we're closing on 1,000 episodes of the Kicking the Seat podcast. What will that 1,000th episode be? I have no idea, and I'm getting a little scared. But yeah, check it out. Like, subscribe, all that business. We'd be happy to have you. And I'm also here Mondays talking movies or whatever this was.
Well, it's been an interesting exploration into the, I would say, the majority of Kong films. We have pretty much covered nearly all the Kong films here on the spoiler room. So only one or two that we haven't. So very interesting to see them, though. I hope you all like this discussion. And yes, next month should be interesting as well. Check out Special Mark Productions. Speaking of milestones, nothing as epic as Ian's, but we're going to be hitting episode 500 in about 2-3 months. And Ian, when you figure out what you're going to do for episode 1000, let me know so I can steal it for episode 500, because I have no idea what I'm doing for that episode, but I got a little bit of time yet for that one, whereas yours is coming up quickly. So yes, folks, check out all of this wonderful stuff. Links on specialmarkproductions.com. And next week we are talking Young Frankenstein, so you'll definitely want to be tuning in for that, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of laughs, a lot of quoting. Not sure how deep dive it will be in, or maybe we'll just all recite the movie from memory. Hard to say, but you'll want to tune in for that. So until next time, folks, we'll just say good night, everyone.
Good night.